We'd like to thank the following sponsors for helping provide this video.
Talk to us about pinning the tail.
So we're going to talk about how metrics can hopefully be helpful for you when you get out there. So a little bit of an introduction. My name is Steve Martin. I'm a principal Agile consultant with Solutions IQ. I've been working in this space for about 25 years. And for those of you who know me, this is probably one of the most unlikely talks you'll ever hear me say. But more and more over the past 2 or 3 years, as I work with a lot of the C-levels, I get asked that question. Hey, we're going through a transformation. What are those top 10 metrics I need to know? And that's not what this talk is about at all. In fact, this talk is going to be a little bit different. This is intended to be actually a workshop. So we're going to do a little 75-minute mini workshop here today and hopefully cover 3 different topics. The first topic being, what are the impacts of metrics on your decision-making process? And a little bit of critical thinking that goes behind those metrics. The second thing that we're going to talk about is more or less what are good metrics and what are bad metrics. I think we're going to come up with a lot of examples of what those bad metrics are. I've got some doozies to share with you as we go through there, ones actually used by real clients. And the third one is actually a game that I've created called Pin the Tail in a Metric, which really helps combine the critical thinking necessary for metrics along with a plan for how we're going to do it. So we're actually going to mock through that in our third act for tonight. So as you probably were hopefully warned or hopefully were excited for, this is going to be an interactive workshop. So go ahead and finish up the things that you got here because chances are you're going to move from the seat that you're in right now. Our time is limited today, so my request to you is to maybe limit the technology and things of that nature. So we can get through a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today. This is also intended to be a conversation, not me up here talking for 74 more minutes. Nobody wants to hear that. And so my expectation is for you to ask questions and for us to have a conversation tonight. But I also want to respect the time box, and we'll be stopping, right on time. And then lastly, if you want to get a copy of this slide deck, go ahead and leave your card here. I promise, I will not spam you. Just leave your card right here, and I'll send the deck to you. I'll also be posting this deck on LinkedIn over the weekend. So you'll be able to, if you want to connect with me through LinkedIn, you can get the deck that way as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with Act 1. When I start working with teams, one of the things that I typically run into is something that looks like what you see on the screen behind me. The teams are pulling together all this information, giving it to their managers, and the teams are thinking the managers are having this conversation. When I talk with my managers, and they give all the information up to their executives, they think the executives are having this conversation. And when we start talking about collecting all this information, it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. And when I was on my way here tonight, I actually thought of 3 stories I'll share with you when it comes to collecting all this information. There was a Scrum Master that I was working with at one organization, and every week, guess how many status reports, different status reports, he had to give every week? 5. 5 different forms of the same status report with maybe a couple different metrics that he's giving to other folks. I thought that was kind of a little bit ridiculous. So when you start talking about all the time, all the effort, all the agony, all the stress to collect all this information, it seems to rise to the heavens above, and we wonder, what are they doing with that information? And then you get the call, or the email, or you're in the meeting, and stop me if you've heard this question before, coming from above, why is your project late? Or, why are you behind? Why are you not making your numbers? Another interesting thing that I read was there was a study done, and I couldn't quite remember the exact study. It was done about 4 or 5 years ago of CEOs, and they were asked the question, of all the decisions that you make on your day-to-day, how many of those decisions do you make using your gut feel and your gut feel only? So what percentage of decisions do you think they were saying that they make with their gut or their gut only? Just throw out some numbers. 95%, 90? You guys are right. So you think about, oh my God, I'm spending 8 to 12 hours a week collecting all this information, and what if you're like working at the portfolio level? All you're doing is status reports, and I wanted to put a word right there. Status reports and metrics and all those things. And you start to think about it, and you're like, metrics. This is what I think of metrics. And I'm just like, it's stressful. It's confrontational. We're not getting anything out of it. No wonder why people don't like to be measured. I don't like to be measured. I'm just like, all right, pause. When is it actually good to have metrics? And I was actually at a workshop when I was doing in Agile Foundations. And I'm just like, we kind of got back to the inspect, adapt, and be transparent. And I'm like, okay, if we put it with that and that hat on, okay, we can actually use metrics for good. Metrics don't have to be this evil incarnate that we see before us. Metrics can actually be used to help open up our eyes, help us make trade-off decisions using real empirical data, and actually get something done. And so, like I said at the very beginning, metrics are one of those kind of tricky things. It's kind of unlikely that we're talking about this, but I know a lot of people are talking about this. And to kind of get us in the mode of working together with some of our neighbors, I'm going to actually start us off with a short exercise here. The good news is when you come to organizations like this and you come to an in-person meeting, one of my objectives that I like to do is have you actually talk to the person either next to you or in a small group of 4 or small group of 5. Otherwise, you'd be listening to this on a video on YouTube, fast-forwarding probably through the last 10 minutes. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to get into probably like a group of 4, group of 5, whatever is comfortable with you. And I'd like for you to have a little talk, a little coffee talk amongst yourselves. And think about this. Introduce yourselves, if not done already. And answer the question, so why do we need metrics anyway? So why do we need metrics anyway? So I want to kind of get us into that mode. So take 4 minutes, gather 3 or 4 of your newest, closest friends, and we'll come back. All right, let's start pulling it back together. All right, so I'm kind of interested in some of the conversations that you had out there. So why do we need metrics anyway?
To show how we are improving.
To show how we are improving. Other things?
To confirm or disprove assumptions or gut feelings.
To confirm or approve or disprove. I'm sorry?
Assumptions or gut feelings.
Assumptions or gut feelings. Other things?
To make some decisions based on it's a kind of a source of information to make some decisions.
Yeah, a source of information to make some decisions. Other things?
Add objectivity to the inspect and adapt cycle.
Data objectivity to the inspect and adapt cycle. 1 or 2 more?
It's important to get the right metrics.
Yes.
Not just the ones that are easy to measure or somebody's measuring anyway, but things that answer the important question about your business.
Yeah, it's important to get the right metrics, not just the easy ones to measure. Great point.
Comparison.
Say that one again?
Comparison.
Comparison?
One program to another.
Okay, comparison of one program to another.
To see whether we're meeting the goals we have set.
To see whether we're meeting the goals that we're going to set. I'm actually going to use that as an excellent transition to my next slide. No, I did not pay him for that. But when we start talking about metrics, one of the things that, again, like I said in my introduction, is I usually get the question of, give me the top X number of metrics we need in order to prove something. And I'm just like, well, that's actually putting the cart before the horse. You know, I actually think it's not the discussion about metrics that needs to happen first. It's actually the discussion of goals. Goals needs to happen first. And so I'm very glad that you said that. And actually I just posted on LinkedIn an article that was titled, Think Goals First, Then Metrics. So we're actually going to talk a little bit about goals, probably not what you expected in tonight's presentation. And I'm not just talking about those SMART goals and things of that nature. I'm talking about those core things of what it is that you want to do. And when you start thinking about those goals, then the metrics that you have should help you with making decisions about those goals. So the goals are actually the keys to everything here, not necessarily the metrics themselves. Now, when I work again with organizations, I usually get questions in 3 or so general areas. The first area is relationship to teams. How do I know that teams are doing well and things of that nature? The other area that I hear a lot of questions about is in the portfolio or the program space. How do I know that this program or portfolio is working well? The other area I typically get a lot more questions about is when you start talking about a transformation or an agile transformation, which, by the way, my personal opinion is a horrible goal. The goal is not to transform. The goal is to do something else. And so you start throwing all these things together, and they say, all right, what's the one and true metric that's going to do all of these things here? This is not Lord of the Rings, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually, you can have different goals for different levels, and I can put my big old asterisk on there, as long as you're going in the same vision or same direction. That's the asterisk. Steve said we can all have different goals. No, as long as you're going in the same direction. Same direction. And so what we're going to do for this next exercise is actually break up into groups. What I'm going to do is, if you are interested in pursuing and talking more about goals and metrics for teams, I would actually like for you to get up and move to this kind of third of the room. Because you're going to be spending some time with them, about the next 45 minutes with them, to discuss hopefully things that are of interest to you when it comes to teams, right? In this kind of first half-ish area here, I'd like for the folks who are interested in exploring a little bit more about portfolios or programs, what their goals and metrics should be, kind of in these first kind of 3 rows right here. And if you're interested in learning more or exploring about the transformation or the organizational space, you guys are usually really obnoxious, so I'll put you in the back. I can't usually hear questions from up here from the back, so we'll kind of put you in the back couple rows. So here's what I want you to do. It's going to take us about 8 minutes to kind of get up, move, and get in small groups. And what I want you to do in your small group is take a look at this question. What are the main goals for teams? What are the main goals for portfolios and programs? What are the main goals for transformations? And we're actually going to use the output of this exercise as we get into the pin the tail of the metric third part of the workshop. All right? Teams, portfolios, and then transformations. Take about 8 minutes to move and answer that question. But I'm pretty sure you have a good idea of what you think the outputs or the goals of programs or portfolios might be. And if not, you've got 7 other folks that you can chat with.
So I'm guessing successful programs, and you ditch the ones that aren't to be profitable for your organization.
All right. So programs and portfolios should make money. Okay. What are some other outputs? All right. Yeah. So
what are the goals for programs?
yeah, for in general programs, portfolios. In this case, it's pretty generic characteristics. Like when you've got a good program, good portfolio, what are some outcomes or some goals that you're looking for? So I want you to talk through goals. And we're going to use that as part of as an input to our next exercise.
Because I feel like good user stories are more likely to come out and be productive and come out with good results. And unless you're calling user stories, likely to have some kind of leave something out and you have to go back and fix it later.
Well, do you understand what I'm trying to it's supposed to be
the card, right? The story card itself, whether it's like it's supposed to drive a conversation. So it's supposed to give enough information that then you might have to go off and ask more specifics of when you go to implement it, what does the customer really want?
Yes.
In other words, the story may not be good enough to do exactly what the customer wants. Or the customer may change their mind once you present what you think they meant, the story that you got from them.
So what I'm saying is, when they go in the bathroom, could we have a metric, maybe one number, maybe some kind of metrics, and say, okay, this is a good, we think this is a good user story, or we think this is not a good user story.
Go back and redo it.
Metrics for user story. Could we have metrics for user story?
Yeah.
I don't know if this part of the exercise is supposed to be trainings yet. I think it's the goals, and then later, after this, we'll probably do metrics.
So my point
doesn't mean we can't.
So my goal would be that we have high-quality user stories. The goal would be that user stories are vetted, they're reviewed, and they are, kind of pruned and nurtured, and then we have like a criteria.
Something a metrics versus a weekly metrics to make some decisions. Some company have 2 weeks, 2 weeks sprint. Sometimes we have 4 weeks. So it doesn't matter as long as we have an objective for the first release of the pre-sprint. And we break down. We talk about in sprint 1 we covered 10 user stories, and that was the objective. The demo was done. Demo does now in terms of showing that it was done successfully. Now the sprint was, what level sprint was successful. And then that's what justifies the second sprint and third sprint, and then we say that release 1 was very well successful. If sprint 1 goes 90% okay, 10% wasn't good, maybe out of 10 user stories, only 8 were done. That ain't going to say that sprint was successful. Like we can measure the ratio. Those input kind of breakdowns in metrics. Okay.
So this probably was a trick question for a lot of folks here. A lot of folks were just saying like, well, is it for this team? Is it for a Scrum team? Is it for Kanban? Is it for... I'm just like, remove that from your thinking. Think about when you come to, when you see a really good team, some of those characteristics, some of those outcomes that you see from really good teams, what are some of those goals? And maybe you can shout out some of those from a team perspective. What are some of the things that the teams came up with on teams?
Good communication.
Okay, goal of good communication. All right, and other things?
Trust and respect.
Trust and respect. Job satisfaction. Say again?
Good quality.
Good quality. Maybe 1 or 2 more?
To determine and find the problems that the team might have.
To determine and find the problems a team might have. Okay, very nice. All right, so let's start taking a look at some of the portfolio things. What were some of those things from a portfolio perspective that were popping up?
Time to market.
Time to market.
Alignment with corporate values.
Alignment with corporate values.
Implement the corporate strategy.
Implement the corporate strategy.
Increase the number of customers.
Increase number of customers.
Customer satisfaction.
And customer sat, and things like that. Do we see any correlation between these two, between teams and portfolios? Did any kind of pop up that were similar? Quality.
Trust over here, values over there.
Trust and values, yeah. So there are certain things that are going to translate across multiple levels. All right, my troublemakers in the back. With my organizational transformation, what were some of the things that you guys came up with back here?
Fulfilling the vision of the organization.
Fulfilling the vision of the organization, yes. Other things?
Framework for working together.
A framework for working together. Mm-hmm. Maybe 1 or 2 more?
Delivering better business values predictably. Better business value predictably.
Delivering better business value predictably. Okay, maybe 1 more?
To achieve business agility so that we can respond to the market better.
Okay, to achieve agility so we can respond to the market better, market response. So those are all really good goals. And so when you start taking a look at these things, instead of jumping right into those metrics and going, the cart before the horse, really think about some of the goals, what it is that you're trying to do. And so the summary for this particular section is metrics should then enable conversations to happen about future events when it comes to those goals. It should not be just merely a status report. So why don't we focus up to the front here a little bit and talk about one or two more things, and then we'll go from here. So metrics consideration.
A metric is a system or standard of measurement. A business metric is a system or standard of measurement used to gauge an organization's success, whether it be a question of efficiency, productivity, attendance, or any other measurable elements. According to the experts, the key to effectiveness is to avoid what they call "so what" metrics.
You know, I think you have to just be really emotionally intelligent about your audience. I mean, the "so what" metric is when you pull some data out in front of an audience and they say, "So what?" Ultimately, you're trying to tell a story, and those stories are tied to some type of action. You know, overload of data, you know, I think ultimately is detrimental to you.
So I actually avoid collecting data, analyzing anything, and reporting anything unless there's a root question we're answering. And because there's a root question driving that metric, I really don't have to worry about the "so what" attitude, because I'm not presenting them just for the purpose of presenting. I'm presenting them their answers.
It's also important that you're choosing the right elements to measure. Even though it may seem like a logical direction, measuring against your competition can often be more harmful than helpful.
We want to compare to somebody else. And I much rather you start you off comparing against yourself. How good were you last year? How good were you last month? Let's set a baseline, and that'll be our benchmark versus benchmarking against another institution. And then see how you improve. Now, once you're happy and your customers are happy and you're meeting customers' expectations and you know you're doing a good job, if you'd like to go see how that compares to other organizations, that's fine.
And how do metrics align with strategy?
So the conversation that you have around all of this stuff is really where the value add is. You know, it's not about just producing things that sit on shelf. It really is about trying to understand complex problems and bringing people together around those understandings.
Operationally, if I'm trying to get an insight to something, that should logically influence my strategic view, right? It's going to tell me things like, operationally, we're either doing well in this area, having problems in this area, this is a pain point, this is something I need to adjust, this is something I need to visit. Well, those things should then inform my plans on a strategic, longer range level, and vice versa.
Another pitfall of using metrics to measure your organization's success is using the collected data and benchmarks wisely.
A lot of people right now, the catchphrase is data-driven decisions, and that scares me to death. I don't want you making decisions based on the data. I want you being informed by the information that you gather, by the measures that you analyze, and then you put together your picture.
Some of the more difficult times when you're having conversations around data is when the data either speaks in a way that was unexpected or counter to people's best guess or their instincts. So having your act together and having your numbers exactly right is incredibly important in those circumstances.
So let's review. Metrics are measures. Metrics should be driven by questions or purpose. Metrics should be used to tell a story to your audience, not a number dump. Data from metrics should not be used to drive decisions, but simply inform decisions. The real value of metrics is opening conversation and collaboration about complex subjects and problems. And metrics should help operations reflect strategy and vice versa.
And that's where I think the real impact is. What actions are you going to take from this data? What priorities are you going to set? And how are you going to respond to the answers to the questions that you found? And then once you've finished, you start the whole process over again.
What makes a good metric then?
Drives the behavior we want.
Drives behavior.
Answers a question.
Answer the questions, all right. Easy to understand. Very good. All right. So if you kind of think about the list of the things that they were saying here, is that was easy to collect data. I think one of us mentioned that earlier today. You don't want to have a metric that's so incredibly difficult to measure or too time consuming. It should be pretty easy to collect that data. Okay, my favorite question. What makes a bad metric?
Irrelevant.
Meaningless. Misleading. creates conflict, drives the wrong behavior,
It's used to evaluate an individual.
used to evaluate an individual.
The metric can be gamed.
The metric can be gamed. I can argue I can pretty much game any metric. It's kind of fun. It's kind of fun.
Irrelevant.
Irrelevant, yes. All very, very good observations of bad metrics. A couple other of my favorite ones are to avoid are what are called vanity metrics. Those are the things that kind of go up and to the right. They will always be increasing. They look good, it feels good, but it doesn't really help you actually make a decision. Tends not to be variable. Just keeps kind of going up to the right. It's non-actionable. Things such as number of page visits. You know, I'm guilty of this. So like, oh yay, somebody visited my page. Makes me feel good, but what's my action I'm going to take out of it? Very little, if anything. Number of unique visitors. Again, makes me feel good. Yay, I'm up to 4, you know, or whatever it is. You know, it makes me feel good. But if it keeps going up and to the right, it's non-actionable. It's kind of like one of those false feeling metrics. Another thing that they really didn't talk about in the video is something that my colleague, I have to credit this slide to him, Dan Fuller, is in how deep do you want to go with those metrics? How deep do you want to go? And there's this article that was written by Michael Bolton, not the singer, but it's the 3 kind of measurements and 2 ways to use them. It's a quick article. It's only a page or 2, an incredibly valuable read. And he's basically saying there's an order of magnitude and how much effort that you want to take in order to have metrics. The first order are things such as you want to just discover some meaning. It tends to be more qualitative. You know, how do you feel? It's, you know, it's a scale of things. It kind of helps you strategize and maybe pivot, you know, pretty early on. And it's fairly inexpensive. Okay, say you're on your way. You're on your way. Okay, maybe you want to tune some performance. Maybe you want to do things with some more numbers and things of that nature. Things that have been going for more than 5 or 6 months. You want to inform some short-term decisions. Things like this take a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. So of course, they're more costly. A lot of the things that I try to do stay between that first and second order. What I'm frequently asked for are things in the third order, which is extremely precise, very scientific, and it's quite expensive. It's quite expensive. So I want you to think about when you are choosing metrics and things of that nature, how deep do you really need to go? Do you need a perfect 100% solution, or is 80% good enough, 50% good enough? Think about what's reasonable. Does this information reasonably give me enough data to make that next decision to meet my goals?
What is your 5 natural laws for?
5 natural laws. That one there, actually, I don't know. That I'll have to ask my colleague. That was one of his spells in there, so I'll ask him for you. All right, so let's see some examples. This is something I've actually used with a team. We were very early on, and remember I wanted to say more towards that first order. Just wanted to collect some data. What we did after 5 sprints is we had some really technical things. We had goals that we wanted to attain. They were having problems with things such as ownership, bouncing back, collaborating with each other. The quality was horrible. And we were unable to ensure that anybody, if they actually took something, they were actually able to finish it. And so they gave themselves a self-assessment. You had me as the coach, and you had the team. We went through, and there's this other thing called scrummability. You know, are we scrumming? You know, kind of having that here. So I did my assessment as a coach, and the team did theirs, and this facilitated a discussion. Because they were 5 sprints in, they were like, yeah, we got this. We're doing everything, you know, everything right. I'm like, well, kind of not really, not quite yet. And this kind of facilitated a conversation. So by the time we got to this after 10 sprints, we were more in alignment with what those things are. What made this work was, number 1, the scores never left the team. I did not share this with management. They were pissed with me, but I would not share this with management. This was for the teams, by the teams, to help them figure out where it is they wanted to go. And number 2 is no performance reviews were ever, part of this here. It was part of helping the teams get better. And that's what we wanted to do there. So this is just kind of an example of perhaps a radar chart that you could potentially use. Question?
So were these just people's individual choices of what their scores were? Here's how I think we're doing on accountability. Here's how I think we're doing on collaboration. Or was there some numerical measure that was external?
So the question was this a numerical thing that the team was pulling together? Was it a sum of all the individuals? So basically, in order to get these numbers here, each person on the team was given a private ballot with the 6 things on it, and just write on that private ballot on a score of 0 to 5, how do you think we're doing? 0 is not at all. 5 is we're an expert.
How people feel.
That's their perception of how they felt.
Okay.
Yeah, and then I collected the individual slips, no names, shuffled in, typed it in a little Excel spreadsheet, and then popped it up, and then we had the conversation. And I kept this, but I never forwarded it on. So here's what I want you to do within your groups here. This is an example for the teams. I want us to take a look at some other metrics actually used by either teams I've coached myself or clients that I've worked with. You see 3 sets of metrics here, one for teams, one for portfolios, one for transformations. What I want you to do is teams, just look at the teams one. Don't look about the other one. I want you to look at those 6 ones there and say, this is a good one. I'm going to look for either all thumbs up, or, oh gosh, that is really bad. All right, so the second area is the portfolios and programs within your teams. I want you to look at just the second column and say, this is a good one, this is this is bad. And the same thing for the back. Just focus on the third column for the ones in the back. Does that make sense? So take 2-3 minutes to do that, and we'll just do some Roman voting here in about 2 or 3 minutes. Can you guys see that all right?
That's good.
That's kind of shows we're probably not planning enough. If it's more than 2 hours, so yeah, so it may not be the absolute hours, but that's sort of
If it's really bad, you don't.
It doesn't correlate.
Right, exactly. And it's good. So then, velocity. Should we do the thing ourselves? Okay. Here's velocity. What do we say? Find out velocity. Go.
Well, it's the best one we've
I'm sure if I left this up here for quite some time, we could have a debate that would take us probably until tomorrow morning on a lot of these here. I'd like to hear from this team maybe one or so that you think was a really good metric for teams. Velocity. Other ones? Percent code coverage. Percent code coverage. Actually, for me personally, I'm this way. I think it's a good thing to maybe start off with, but over time, things such as velocity and things such as percent coverage aren't going to matter. There's going to be other things over time that are going to change. And so you're going to see a theme here that sometimes you might start with some of those things, but over time, things such as velocity is going to become less important, and things such as percent coverage becomes less important because it's always going up. You're going to reach a threshold. And so I'm sure we can have a lot of spirited conversation about those last 2 comments. All right, so this group over here, from a portfolio perspective, what's something that was resonating very well with you?
At first we said none of them, and I campaigned for number of stories completed because that's tied to business value, although I would have said number of stories as a percent of total MVP stories.
Okay. So initially you said none of them. They all suck.
Yeah.
All right.
And then we got into, I was campaigning for a number of stories, pointing out the fact that a story is business value, represents business value. It's written by a product owner. At least by that definition, that would measure the success of your program. And I would argue you also would want to do it as a percent of total stories with a minimum value.
Okay. Interesting, interesting. Other folks, maybe we can do one more that you guys liked.
I think we as a group like system performance.
System performance, yes. What was it about that that resonated with you?
We felt it was the most useful and the less likely to be.
Most useful and less likely to be gamed. It's like we can almost anything, right? Back area, in terms of transformations, was there one or so that popped up to the top?
Lead time.
Lead time? Any more? You're like, oh no, the rest of them suck. All right. So, was there anyone over here that was particularly bad?
Hours spent in sprint planning.
Hours spent in sprint planning. Oh my God, this was an actual metric used. Because the person at that C level was getting a lot of complaints that we're spending way too much time planning. And so what they did is they started to track how much time each team was spent planning. Guess what happened? The planning time went down, but there was also another effect. All right, which one was particularly bad over here for this group?
Number of stories completed.
Number of stories completed? I think, is that what you just said here? Yeah, numbers of stories completed? Okay, yay, great.
It's bad, though.
Yeah, yeah, great. Numbers of stories completed, so what? Yeah, so for some folks it's like yes, and for some folks it's like, yeah.
We also said number of automated regression tests because it depends on what you're testing and how you're testing it.
Yeah, number of automated regression tests was the comment over there. In the back, was there one that was particularly bad?
We thought number of teams trained was pretty silly.
Yeah, number of teams trained. That's my favorite transformation metric. If you've been trained, then it's going to happen. Yes. So there's some really particularly bad ones that can happen out there. I'm going to leave a couple of these for your reading that you can do when you get the slide deck, when you can leave some cards here or check it out on LinkedIn. Okay, another plug. But there's a couple things. You want to make sure that you have a few simple metrics. Make sure that it's well-rounded. And the things that you choose, make sure that they're in alignment with the goals that you have. The next slide is actually a scorecard that I used with a portfolio level. And what they tried to do was a post-release scorecard. They were doing monthly releases, and they wanted to see how they were doing at the end of every month. So this particular one, the ones that they wanted to really focus on were business expectations. Did we really meet the business expectations? Communications, are we communicating with our customers in the manner that we wanted to do? How's our quality? And then from a planning perspective, they were horrible with their planning. They wanted to take a look at that a little bit more. By and large, in general, like business expectations, did it meet expectations? Percent user story definition before coding begins was something that they wanted to do. And so I thought this was okay, I could live with this one. But I also didn't want to see this go after release, after release, after release, after release, after release. I thought, okay, this is a good place for them to at least start, and they can figure out where they want to go from there. The next one is an eye chart. And so I will leave it for you to take a look. But it's basically percent completes of this, percent completes of that. And it's a comparison and ratios of things. I'm okay with ratios. I think ratios are a good thing, as opposed to just a hard number. How is this in comparison to baseline? How is this in comparison to that? I think those tend to be good things. And this particular one had only 4 things they were looking at. This was more of a real-time thing, so it was more of a dashboard, versus the other one, a scorecard, which is more of static. Dashboards and scorecards, we can debate, which one is better, and are they the same thing, and things of that nature, all that we want. But when it comes down to it, a couple other things. Use a small number of metrics. Make sure that you really keep focus on the goals. And as we talked about earlier, you can revise your metrics over time. If you ask yourself the question, why in goodness name am I still collecting this data? That's probably a good sign that you need to have a conversation with somebody on why we're collecting this and why we're using it. And are we good enough? Is there something else that we want to focus on? All right. So that was the section on good metrics, bad metrics, and some considerations for you to have. So let's put a little bit of this to use. And so now we're going to start with something called pin the tail in the metric. I've actually used this with what tends to be more of management teams or portfolios or agile transformations, less with teams itself. But I think this is something that is really good to start a conversation. There are 6 steps in this, and I'm going to try to walk you through each of the 6 steps here. So the very first step that we have right here is creating a scale. And what we're going to try to do is, actually we're going to step 2, is we're going to create your workspace. I flip these around. So when you've got a little scale that's coming along here, what I want you to do is on the tape, not on the table, but on the tape, write on one end the words painfully useless, and on the other end of the tape, very useful. Again, make sure you write on the tape, not on the table, please. So while that's happening, I'm going to back up to step number 1. Step number 1. I want you to create a list of the current metrics in your company that you use. So if you've got a current metric that you use for teams, you've got some index cards that are there, just write the name of that metric and who you're grabbing that metric for. Just do maybe 1 or so per person. Pick something from a team, something real. Same thing with portfolios and programs. So what are the metrics that you're collecting on an actual program or portfolio right now, and who are you reporting that to right now? So you got your index cards there as well. And in the back, do the same thing. In each group, you'll end up with, let's say, 8 or so cards. 8 or so cards. So take a few minutes to do that. Make sense? Questions?
Yeah, we write down our metrics. And it's meaningful.
If you're not getting focused on what's causing the call, it's you should know.
All right, so we'll do 1 or 2 more steps here. I'm seeing some really spirited discussion on metrics here, so I love it. I love it. So several of you are already naturally doing the next couple steps. Now, when you do this, you do the brainstorming. There's lots of discussion that happens here, and you've got your piece of tape, painfully useless on one end and very useful on the other. Step 3 of this, and this is the fun part, and I want to practice this here, is silently, take your finger, put it on a card, and slide it up and down the scale. Slide it up and down the scale. Take about 30 seconds to a minute silently. Slide your cards up and down the scale of what you think is very useful to painfully useless. Silently. Slide them up and down the scale.
Question?
Yes.
So is each member of the team is supposed to do that competition with the other members? That way, not this way?
That's step 4. When the discussion happens. Yeah, so shuffle them up and down. Take a look at which are more the useless and which ones are towards the more useful. The trick to doing this is silently. The discussion will happen shortly. Either your own cards or... I think you're going to find it's not. Because when you get to the discussion, the cards are going to move anyway. All right, take about another 10 seconds or so to do that. If you have other ideas for other metrics that pop in your head as you do that, feel free. Add those. Now, usually when I do this with the management team, it ends up looking something like this. Managers, 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 managers. Oh, one for the team. And they all seem to be very useful, don't they? They all seem to be very useful. And so this is where step 4 kind of really shines the light on those things. Remember those goals that you came up with earlier? Those goals that you came up with earlier? I'm not sure if you really wrote them down. But if you happen to write them down, what I do is I stick them right here in the middle, right underneath that line. So remember what I said, metrics and goals should be working together, right? So step 4 is to post your goals next to the workspace and then recap the goals for your team. So very quickly, take 1 minute within your team, recap the goals of what were the goals of the team, what were the goals of the portfolio, what were the goals of the transformations. Just take about 30 seconds to a minute just to refresh your mind what it is that you said earlier. Okay, so let's pull it back together. And so very naturally, you're on to step number 5 already. You're starting to realize that the metrics that you have right now may not align with the goals that you have. And that's the next step. Now, when I do this with an organization, it takes 60 minutes to 90 minutes to do this. We're kind of mocking our way through the conversation because I want to just kind of give you a favor of the feel of how this thing works. What typically happens now is the realization and the light bulbs that these goals and these metrics, one is not like the other. And now is when the kind of discussion happens. And this is where you're going to spend probably 30 to 45 minutes talking about each one of these cards and who you're actually doing the metrics for, and do they match up with the goals. And so remember earlier, everything was off to the side. Now that you've reviewed the goals, they move. Not only do the cards move, but certain things come off, certain things come on, and then I start to see, oh, here's one for teams, here's one for teams, here's one for teams, here's one for managers. We start crossing off things like velocity. You know what? That really isn't for managers. It should be for teams. It should be for teams to figure out what is reasonable for them to pull in, for them to work on. My experience has been after 5 to 7 sprints, they will know what they can work on, especially if you have persistent teams and you have a consistent time box. Couple key assumptions there. So velocity over time becomes less important. So it's kind of hard to see when I had my original thing for velocity, I said it was for managers, but it actually should be for teams. So you'll see things being crossed off. And then this is the really rich, powerful part of the conversation. This is where you're going to spend your time. You're also going to find that there's metrics up here that are painfully useless, and those just kind of go all the way off to the side. And you're going to find that, hey, we missed something. Then you're going to add some things in there. And so what happens is certain things are going to fall off. And that's okay. And that's okay.
So my question is, around velocity, if it's being used to indicate whether you're going to make your goal, if you make some assumptions and it's slowing down, what else would you use, or why would it not be useful?
So that's a very good question. When it comes to showing whether or not you're going to make it, for me it comes down to working software in the demo. You know, for me, a velocity and just looking at a chart, okay, it is what it is. But unless I've got working software and going to there and showing it from that perspective, that's where I tend to get my information from. I don't know, other folks, where do you guys get that? How else would you show it?
Have a working demo right this very second of work completed today, but you know, you need to know your trend for the next 3 months, 6 months. You need to measure something to know if it's gonna fit or not.
How often are the estimates and things 6 to 8 months out in advance accurate? Very little, in my experience, is very little. I tend to not go past a 3-month window, is my general rule of thumb. Anything after 3 months or anything after 3 iterations, I use the very technical term, squishy. And so I don't put a lot of effort into that past 3 months. I'll say a statement, it might piss a few people off, but I also don't do funding more than a quarter at a time. Because if I've got a consistent team, I know the burn rate for a team, I know what my budget is. And if I know what my budget is, we always answer the question or ask the question, is it worth it for us to continue the investment in these things? So I tend to look at it from that perspective, as opposed to, am I going to make it after 6 to 8 or months? So that's typically how I tend to look at those types of things. So it's kind of a different way to kind of say, you know, whether or not we do that. And it's the feedback of the product and the feedback from the clients and the users that's going to give me an indication if I'm making it or not. If I've got that transparency and going from that Agile manifesto to the collaboration end of things, it becomes less important. So, all right. I want to be, again, respectful of the time that we have here today. So I just have a few other words here to finish up. The last thing that you would need to do, step number 6, is once you've gotten to your metrics that you want to do, and it's a limited set of metrics, you need to figure out what's the reporting frequency and how you're going to collect data and things of that nature in order to make that. All right, so some of the next conversations that happen after this, there's 3. There's 3 considerations that you need to have. Number 1, metrics are only part of the story. There's a whole nother workshop here about governance, right? And how you're going to use this information to make those decisions. So not only is it that you're looking, when you consider metrics, the goals, you've got the metrics, but you also have to look at the governance in and of itself, how you're going to use the data, and what decisions you're going to use, who's involved, and things of that nature. The next thing is creating the culture of safety around the discussion of the information that's here. Like I said earlier, it's hard to be measured. I don't like to be measured. But if I know that this is going to be done for something for good, and it's going to be helpful, it's going to help me make trade-off decisions, and I'm safe to have those discussions, and it's, quote, either safe to fail or safe to have opportunities pop up, whatever that is, it's going to make this conversation go a lot better. That's probably about a 2-day workshop right there to go over something like that. And lastly, I personally think it's okay to experiment with metrics. We're not going to get this right. Just like we inspect, adapt, and be transparent with what we have with our product and the working things that we get out there, the process by which we do it, I also expect us to experiment with. We're not going to get the metrics right on the first time, and that's okay. We just still need to go back to the goals and think about, do we have the information necessary to support decisions getting to those goals? And if the metrics that we have don't get us there, or we've been collecting them too long, let's experiment with whatever else is necessary to get us there. So we're running a little short on time here, so I'll be happy to answer maybe one or two. But again, I want to respect the time box here to 8:20. So we'll go one here and then one in the back. All right, so we have a question up here.
Right, so you talked about how we should consider what is being done on quarterly basis and compare it against what the expectations were and base our futuristic decisions about to continue or not to continue based on that. But even for that decision, you still have to measure something. Either it has to be return on investment, so we were thinking we're going to put in $100,000, we're going to get back 150 or 50 now and the rest later down the line. So in your opinion, what are those measurements if you're not measuring velocity, if we're not measuring productivity? What are those measurements that will base our decision to continue or not continue on?
And so for me, it still kind of comes down to the demo, the vision, what are the goals of that product, whether or not you have an understanding of here's the problem that the customer has, here's the solution in its interim state, are we going in the right direction, and having a conversation with my customer. And doing that on a very periodic basis. I like to touch my customers at least once per month, whether it's a customer focus group, phone calls, or even better yet, one of the things that I saw from this morning's Agile for Executive session is they actually had the customers come in and use the product as part of the demo while they had the rest of the team surrounding. So it's that interaction for me in making that decision. All right, here's what's been completed. With our knowledge, we think this is the next chunk of work that we can do. Is it worth the investment of the next $50,000? Yes or no, in making that decision. By and large, my experience has been most companies are comfortable funding, okay, yeah, we'll go another month, unless it's really bad. Unless it's really bad. Does that answer your question? Yeah, so it's getting away from a number and getting more towards the conversation.
That I understand, yes.
All right.
That is conveyed.
All right, so one more in the back.
You mentioned it in introduction as one example, and then in one of my small groups, I heard somebody mention it again, having to put 5 status reports together, over the course of a week. And in my small group, it turned out that there was similar data, just different formats to different managers. How would you use what you explained to us to push back on that and to clear that up? Because I've seen that quite often, aside from tonight, which is why I bring it up.
Yeah, and so when it comes to that, it's the conversations, the one-on-one conversations I would have with each of the managers. And so I wouldn't get them together necessarily all at once, but I'd go to manager number 1, help me understand the information. How does this information help you make decisions? What are the decisions you're making off of that? Depending on how that conversation goes, I said, I noticed that another manager has something very similar. Would you be open to a conversation about perhaps combining these two things together? So it's a lot of kind of understanding where that person's coming from, understanding their pain points, why they have to have it their way, and then kind of bringing it together as a shared solution and getting the buy-in. Okay, maybe it's only 2 reports instead of 5, and that's actually what we ended up with. 2 reports instead of 5 because it's going to save time. And look at this, we can actually get more stuff done for you if we can only do it in this, 1 or 2 formats. And so it's a lot of that one-on-one conversation and trying to get them to come together, understanding what their pain points and why they asked for it in the first place. All right. So with that, I'll go ahead and do some closing here. Again, if you'd like to get a copy of the slides, just go ahead and leave your card up here or check me out on LinkedIn. I will have those posted up here sometime this weekend. So thank you very much for coming and being fantastic participants. Thank you.